I'm going to read some bits of 32 thoughts here.
Okay.
Let's start at thought number 10. Bob Clarke dropped bombs on Cam Jansen and Andy Strickland's podcast. This is Bob Clarke, aka the Philadelphia Flyer, Bobby Clarke. If you never, I think you know who Bobby Clarke is. Taking a big run at former Philadelphia Flyer GM Ron Hextall. If anything, that confirmed a huge divide between Hextall and the Flyers alumni, a power struggle that played a major factor in Hextall's firing. My main takeaway from the timing of Clark's comments is that the heat is on, and Comcast is deciding what direction the team should go. Clarke would want current GM Chuck Fletcher to rebuild the team if that's the chosen path. By taking this route, he's trying to make sure that happens. He'd do anything to defend someone he likes. That sounds like Bobby Clarke. Thought number 11, asked about Clark's comments. One scout laughed. It was Heiskanen, not Makar, close enough. AK, what that's referring to is Bobby Clarke said, none of our scouts wanted to take Nolan Patrick second overall. Of course, they moved up in that draft. So did I want to say they were like the best team to miss.
Yeah, they barely missed the playoffs that year. Yeah.
Moved up, yeah. So this makes a lot of sense because Cale Makar has very much been in the news this year because he is having a Bobby Orr-like season. It's incredible to watch. And basically Rip saying, like, none of our scouts liked him. We wanted to Cale Makar, and Hextall just said no. There's a bit wrong here. First off, and I'm going to get to thought number 12 in a second. Again, that scout said it was Heiskanen, not Makar. Very different players, which fair enough. First off, for those of you who don't remember, a majority of that year, Nolan Patrick was slated to go number 1. But I think what threw doubt was he had a shoulder injury and didn't play a lot of time for Brandon, I think.
Yeah.
Wheat Kings. And to criticize, there have been a lot of decisions with the Flyers lately under Fletcher that I think are very much should be taken into question instead of throwing this sort of fire at a GM who's been out of your organization for how many years and was right about Carter Hart, by the way.
Yeah, I listened. So I actually listened to the entire interview because I was really curious if he had anything else to say. With the Makar stuff, like if you go look at that draft, I think I want to say it's Merrick who brings it up quite a bit. That like there were teams that had Pedersen was in that draft as well, was he not?
He was 5th.
Like Pedersen, there are teams who had Pedersen at first too. So like I think I think looking at this draft now is a lot of 2020 hindsight. So I don't think it's fair to do that to Ron Hextall. I don't agree with Ron Hextall's way of running a team. That's besides the point. This is a gut feeling here. I wonder if Bobby Clarke did this because Ron Hextall moved to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know their rivalry isn't as hot today, but at one point it was.
Ron Hextall leaving, right? You got to remember at the end of the day, this is the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah.
Right? There's an identity to that. I think it helps. I think there's a log in the fire there. I believe, because obviously things in Philly haven't been great, but it feels, it's not, again, we don't agree with him, and there's a lot, like the Ristolainen move was a bit butthead and all that. Yeah, it was a bit kind of questionable there, but does it help? No. That's just because, as Freeman reminds people, they've never had a good relationship. Like how I don't think it was surprising how open Stan Bowman was in the Jenner and Block report about Quenneville. It's not for Stan Bowman's willingness to talk. You question how many hockey people from that Blackhawks group would still be in place, for example. I don't think it's the main reason, but I think it definitely, if Bobby Clarke's up late at night after a bad Flyers lost, I'm sure he's thinking, and he went to Pittsburgh.
There's a lot to nitpick here because when I look back on like what Alex said with the 2017 draft, there were a lot of like questions about who's going to go first, what are we going to do? I remember there was a huge emphasis on the World Juniors for Nico Hischier. And when you look back on things, I remember for the scout report, like Cale Makar was not expected to be in the top 5 for a lot of lists. And I remember Vancouver was criticized for taking Elias Pettersson over Cody Glass, or Timothy Liljegren falling to 17th. These are so many things that, again, Alex said, hindsight is 2020. And I look back on Nolan Patrick, and I just want to focus on 2 things here. First, before I go into Nolan Patrick, I remember Bobby Clarke also threw Morgan Frost under the bus, where he said we had 2 first-round picks in that, and none of them are going to make it, or none of them are going to play. And I'm pretty sure Morgan Frost is on the active roster right now. And the second thing with Nolan Patrick is just an unfortunate thing, because he was that prototypical, power forward scoring center that a lot of teams would love to have. And he tried his best. He really did. I remember he showed up to 2 World Junior summer camps injured and still tried to make the team. And then even after the Flyers, he was just thinking about getting better and coming back. And the way they just kind of dismiss everything like that, where in a way, I don't use this slang word, but you're dunking on the guy when he's not there anymore and he can't defend himself.
Regardless, he was a top-rated pick in that draft. And yet, this guy, I'm sure he wanted to be a Flyer, but his body it didn't work. And it's not even just throwing Hextall. It's like you're saying it with Morgan Frost now. He's ripping this guy too. Do you guys remember early this year? I forget who it was, but there was something to do. Merrick talked about something on 32 Thoughts. It had to do with the Boston Bruins and debate over the McAvoy pick, I think it was. And someone in the Bruins reached out in the next episode of 32 Thoughts. Merrick corrected it. Have you ever once heard the Bruins complain about their consecutive picks of what was it, Zaboral, Dubrovsky, who's the third one? Senyshyn, and then everyone's like, oh, Connor, Shabbat, and Barzell. The Bruins internally, maybe, and yes, the Tyler Seguin thing is well known, but have you heard, Jeremy Jacobs come out and say, Senyshyn's a damn plug, man, I would have loved that Kyle Connor, Michigan kid? No. That's a difference. There's a difference there. And if you want any sort of further thought as to where the Flyers are, I'll finish off with thought number 12. Elliot, what a great guy. Likes my shoes. 12. It's been too long, but love doing Philadelphia. Been too long, but love doing games in Philadelphia. You remember that when Patrick Kane scored to win the 2010 Stanley Cup, no one realized it was in. I was working rinkside then, standing in the Zamboni Arena area with a monitor. As I watched the replay, several fans started yelling, "Is it in? Is it a goal?" When I nodded and said yes, what followed was some of the loudest, most creative swearing ever heard on earth. The passion was amazing. Their love for the Flyers, both past and present. That game was in Philadelphia, by the way. Philadelphia's upcoming scouting meetings are going to be intense. There will be deep conversations about both personnel and on-ice direction. However, it sure seems like the organization needs to work on something else, re-engaging history. I couldn't believe how many angry direct messages filled my inbox because that would have been Ed Snyder's 89th birthday, was not recognized during last Thursday's game against Pittsburgh. That follows many of those same fans feeling last November's Flyers Hall of Fame induction was mishandled. There's work to do here. And if there's a market that's going to let you know when you're messing up, I didn't know that about the Ed Snyder thing. That's massive. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's huge.
The Flyers. A lot to keep. Claude Giroux's so gone, but I know I keep bringing this up, but Claude Giroux is so gone, eh?
Isn't it weird? They always have a weird history with their it's a lot more muted with Claude Giroux, but it's always weird. The Flyers in the last 20 years has always had a weird thing with their captains. And I'd like to point out before we move on, Bobby Clarke picked Eric Lindros to be captain of the Olympic team over Gretzky, Yzerman, and Sakic.
So they talk about that in the interview, and he goes, "Yeah, that was the wrong mistake." I'm like, oh, cool. I guess you. No, really, it was a mistake.